Mishmash! Kitbash Corner!
Hey, today we're doing another episode of the Random Space Marine Kitbashing series. And I'm totally not banking on the hype of Astartes II. What am I talking about? That's exactly what I'm doing. Well, if you haven't guessed, for this episode I'm going to be kitbashing a couple of the chapters from the trailer, this being the Scythes of the Emperor and Angels in Carmine. I actually got a couple extra marines that are currently brewing in the pot, this being yet another Sons of Medusa and one of the Mortificators. So you can expect a sequel next week, but for now we're going to be focusing on these two. But without further ado, make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share it with a friend, and if you really dig it, consider becoming a channel member. For just $3 a month, you get to see my videos early, and for $5, you get access to a weekly Q&A, in which you can send in your miniatures and I'll give them a little review. Additionally, you also get access to exclusive roles within the Mishmash Discord, as well as exclusive sneak peek channels. And above everything, it just really helps me out. I'm a small YouTuber, and I can tell you that every single donation means the world to me. Also, if you're interested in anything Wargames Atlantic related, especially Quar, you can use my affiliate link down below, and you can use my discount code MISHMASH5% to save 5% off your purchase. But enough of the promotional stuff, it's enough yapping, time to get bashing. It doesn't rhyme. But to start things off, we're going to be talking about the Angels in Carmine. Now, a common trope in the 40k scene is almost all Blood Angel successors look alike. I don't have a follow-up to that. Angels in Carmine are kinda like that, to be honest. But what sets them apart is they have a worrying amount of Death Company members. And that's what I want to focus on in this episode. See, one of my favorite parts of Angels in Carmine is their Death Company and Sanguinary Guard adorn their armor with a strikingly white color scheme. Which is, I don't know, it makes my brain buzz. It's like Voltorb from Pokemon. I just like that he's red and then he turns blue. I don't know, something cool about opposites. But beyond other lore tidbits, the Angels in Carmine are a second founding chapter and have been around for some of the most interesting battles in Blood Angels history. But to expand upon the most interesting lore bit of their Death Companies being at an extremely high number, these guys were the first to put Primaris Marines into the Death Company. Yahoo! But being mean to GW aside, this is why I wanted to kitbash these guys. Basically, what I want to do is use some of my old Death Company bits to remake and redesign some of the Death Company Primaris Marines to give them the old flair that made me fall in love with the series to begin with. If you're familiar with the channel, you'll know that Blood Angels were my first army, and they hold a pretty special place in my heart. The first thing we'll be doing, however, is I'm going to be snipping down this Primaris bolt pistol from a Reaver's kit, and I'm going to leave the hand intact. While simultaneously, I'll be taking this Death Company bolt pistol arm, and I'll be snipping it down to the base of the bolt pistol. You can probably see where this is going. Usually I don't really care about firstborn hands on Primaris arms. It really doesn't make that much of a difference. But trimming things down like this gives me more of an option on how I can pose the bolt pistol. Rather than just having it kinda limply sitting in his hand, I can make more of an aggressive stance. Also, for the sake of it fitting nicely in his hands, I'd have to slice things down, as you can see. It's actually kind of satisfying to do this, so I had to stop myself. Before attaching it, I'd fit it on dryly just to make sure everything fit in place, and I would use just a little bit of Tamiya to make sure that it adheres nicely. There's a tiny bit of a gap, but it's actually not that noticeable. I did use a little bit of sprue glue later on to really make sure everything was nice and sealed up. But overall, I'm really happy with how it turned out. It was something that took a little extra time and I could have just glued on the bolt pistol itself, but I think doing it this way makes it look a little bit more impressive. Next for his melon, I decided to use this old Blood Angel's Firstborn helmet, and it is kind of a weird fit because this body I'm using, I know it looks really scrungly, had a magnet installed into it and I couldn't remove it, so it was basically super glue on a basic body. Afterwards, I would attach the first arm, and I would use a little bit of super glue once more as this body was not fully stripped like I mentioned, so super glue was the way to go. Now to add a pauldron, I'm using one from the old Sternguard kit, this being the one with the tassels and the little emblem. I feel like this is pretty akin to a Blood Angel symbol. It's not technically Blood Angels, but I like how it looks overall. Plus the gravity of the actual tassel works pretty well for what I'm going for. Now for his other arm, I'm using an old push-fit arm. I'm actually not even sure what this one is from. But after trimming away at the built-in pauldron, I would super glue it onto the body. And once it was snug in place, I would use a Death Company pauldron and I would attach it on. Again, I know it looks scrungly, but the results speak for themselves by the end. Now, before attaching his other weapon, I'm technically adding another one in the form of this ceremonial dagger that comes with the original Death Company kit. I really like this piece, it fits on very nicely. In fact, I'd like to see this in other kits. Doesn't even have to be Blood Angels related. I just like having little daggers like this. Now for his other arm, I'm going to be attaching this awesome Power Sword saber from the same kit. I always love the variation that you can get with Blood Angel swords. It's funny, I love Blood Angels upgrades and things like this for the same reason I dislike Dark Angel stuff. I guess I just like Blood Angels better. But for the final detail, I'm adding on that old classic jump pack. I don't know, I just prefer the boxy designs. New ones aren't terrible, but this is just my favorite. But now let's paint this guy up, and I'll go over the cliff notes. First things first, I'd apply a prime of Panzer Gray from Vallejo, and I would spray over the model using some bold titanium white, which will act as a primer, but also a base coat. Now here's where things get really interesting. To shade the model, I'm actually using a mixture of Apothecary White with a tiny touch of Guilliman Flesh. Though I know I wanted to go for a pearly white, I thought doing a cool off-white and grungy effect would be more interesting. Additionally, this mixture has a nice little dollop of some contrast medium just to thin it out a little bit, but for the most part we're going to be layering this over the entirety of the white. On camera, it does look a little nastier than it actually is. It's a lot more subtle in real life than what the camera portrays, but I can assure you this is a really cool effect and you can use it for all kinds of different miniatures. Actually, a good example is the Iron Squat Prospector armor. Now, fast forwarding immensely, I'm not going to show every little element of the miniature, mind you. Now, one thing I do want to mention before we get onto the highlighting phase, I'm going to be doing a weird effect by adding just a tiny dollop of Black Legion onto random portions of the armor, and we'll add in some water to drag down the paint and create a little bit more depth, but not too much. This is kind of a weird way of doing this. I don't even know why I did it. It was just kind of fun. But I think it worked out pretty well. We'll also be applying this over the red, though I'm not really going to go into painting the red. This is mostly for the white armor. But for the rest of the white armor, I'm going to be highlighting using some Ghost Gray from Vallejo Game Color. I mentioned this on the channel a million times, but basically this color is my favorite white or off gray, whatever you want to call it. It's that nice perfect balance between a bright gray and not entirely a bright white. I'll be applying this in a sketchy method of highlighting as I'm kind of used to with Space Marines, and additionally we'll be adding on some random dollops for some chipping effects. If you want to paint them clean, be my guest, I ain't your mammy. Now, once everything is established with the highlights, you can also use some bold titanium white on the sharper details if you wish, but I think this looks good as is. And for all those chips, we'll be filling them in using a mixture of black and some dryad bark. Undoubtedly, if you're familiar with how I paint Space Marines, this is my tried and true method, and it's just something that you can do to really easily get a bunch of cool looking Marines ready for the tabletop. It can be a little bit more complex if you wish to, but I think for the most part this is a very, very easy method of getting some interesting variation on armor without having to do much work. The only thing that it comes down to is brush control. And if you see how I apply my highlights, you'll know that I don't have a lot of that, so it works out pretty well for me. But with that, our awesome off-white Death Company Angels in Carmine is complete. I like this figure. I'm not a huge fan of painting this scheme, though I do love building Death Company Primaris Marines, so you can definitely expect a second part more dedicated to that aspect. But with that, I think it's about time we get on to the second Marine, this being a Scythe of the Emperor. These guys are just classic. Total classics. Though officially they are a third founding chapter, their origins trace back to the Phantom 11th Company, the original Ultramarines Legion. They're well known for being guardians of their homeworld of Sotha, though on the same coin, they're equally infamous for their failure to defend it against the relentless onslaught of Hive Fleet Kraken. As you can imagine, this crushing defeat has left a pretty deep scar on the pride of the Scythes, and this has also fueled some interesting conflict between the newly recruited Primaris Marines and the Old Guard. But undoubtedly, the coolest element of their lore is their main chapter relic is actually the helmet of Barbas d'Antioch, a loyalist Iron Warrior of whom perished on Sotha. They're pretty freaking cool if you ask me. But I think it's about time we actually do some kit bashing. First and foremost, the body I'll be using is one of the Blade Guard veterans. And for his gun arm, I'm going to be using this push-fit bit from the Angels of Death kill team. Originally, this is locked into a very specific peg, so to make this fit I had to use a little bit of sprue goo. This allowed it to fit very nicely once I applied a tiny bit of pure Tamiya. As you can probably guess, this softens the sprue goo so it applies a little bit more cleanly. Though I do kind of wish I added a little bit more of a groove to the sprue goo itself to make those kind of limb coils look more apparent. Above everything, however, I do like how this looks. It's a good pose and the entire body is put into it. Now for his melee arm, I'm going to be using the Power Fist, which came from the same Angel's Death kit. I really like how this looks in terms of posing, though I can't really take much credit as these two arms are actually supposed to be linked together for the Space Marine Captain figure. I basically just changed the body, though, whatever, I'll take all the credit I can get. When it comes down to it, the body does lend itself well to these arms, it does really pose the figure overall. I'm really happy with the kind of on-guard look I got going for him. But for his other pauldron, I decided to go pretty basic. I didn't want to add any crazy details, I wanted to leave some room for some freehand. And seeing how the other pauldron is already highly decorated, I don't want to make this figure look too loud. But now for his melon, I'm going to be using one of the helmets from the Legion Command Squad upgrade set from the Horus Heresy line. These helmets are pretty sweet. I think I wanted to use this one in particular, however, as it does have kind of an Iron Warriors look to it. Originally, I was going to add on a basic Iron Warriors upgrade helmet, but ultimately the Command helmet offers a little bit more detail, and it offers me the opportunity to paint in more contrasting colors on the tassel. I know some people don't like having the Horus Heresy Marine helmets on the basic Primaris ones, as they do look a little small, but in my opinion, I think they look a little bit more proportional. Now for his base, I decided to snip off one of my old Hormagaunts, as I don't really have any plans for him, and I'll be adding this onto the base. However, by the end of the video, he'll have a completely different base, but we'll still be using this. Also, total side note, but I am really annoyed at myself that I painted up the Tyranid as a Leviathan rather than a Kraken. But that's besides the point. The last little element I'll be adding to this figure is this nice little ornament from the Company Heroes kit. The standard Firstborn one. I don't know, it's basic, but I like it. It's kinda cute. Also, it's kind of a tribute to one of my old Sides of the Emperor I painted ages ago. But now that he's built, I'll go over the basics of how I painted this guy up. First, after the initial spraying of Panzer Grey, I'll be spraying over the miniature using a little bit of khaki from Puracryl, as well as the cream tabard. I know my airbrush looks messy. I know it does. I don't have a follow-up to that. It just looks messy, I know. I'm sorry. After this pseudo base coat, I dry brushed over using a little bit of ivory, and I would mask over the tabard using some airbrush putty, and I'd spray over using some Imperial Fist. I know airbrushes are the devil, but I will say painting yellow is a breeze when you have an airbrush. While it dried, I painted over all the black areas using satin black from Puracryl, and for the trim I decided to go for the gold color. This being a mixture of Retributor armor and some rich gold from Puracryl. Though over time I favored the rich gold as it had a better flow. And in most of the lore depictions, the gold is typically almost as bright as the yellow, so upping the brightness was kind of a key factor in my eyes. Though I won't lie, I kinda wish I painted this red. Also, for the rest of the trim, I decided to use a mixture of bronze and rich gold to create a better mixture overall. I think the color was a little different for what I was originally going for, but the flow was so much better and it was easier to work with, so I prefer this. And for the metallics, I basically just shade them using a mixture of Oblivion Black Wash and some Battle Mud Wash. For the mohawk, I actually just dry brushed a little bit of yellow over the creamy khaki, and then I just used a tiny bit of Blood Angel's red, and man, worked perfect. Only thing I had to be mindful for was not hitting any of the gold trim. But to really draw attention to undoubtedly the most important part of the figure, this being the yellow, I decided to mix a little bit of mahogany with some dark brown, and I would wash it into the recesses, just to create more of a dirtied pattern. You could use some more official dirty down methods, such as using a little bit of streaking grime, but personally I always like adding in a little bit of weathering using my basic acrylics to really control the color. It's all personal preference, of course, but this is the way that I like to do it. Now I'm going to go into the freehanding element a little bit, though I will warn you I'm not the best at this. For painting the symbol, I usually like to use a mixture of some khaki and some yellow, just to establish a thinner but ultimately better consistency for actually freehanding the symbol. I don't go too in depth with actually painting this, it's really just a matter of crossing the two hilts and managing to paint the second blade. Usually the first scythe is easier to paint because you're basically instinctually going to be painting with your dominant hand and whatever feels best. So the second one, there's no shame in taking a little bit of time to clean it up. Thankfully, we're painting this over black, so cleaning this up is super duper easy. And after adding a couple dollops of black over the symbol to kind of create a little bit of a paint chipped effect, I would use some Imperial Fist yellow and I would go over the symbol. I do want to be sparing with this because it does bleed into the black, and if you look at it from a certain light, it's very obvious. Just make sure you clean up around the edges, that's all it really amounts to. But coming back to the main portion of the yellow, we'll be highlighting using a little bit of Flash Gits yellow. I actually ended up using a mixture of warm yellow from Proacryl and some khaki, but this is basically the equivalent to Flash Gits. I'd also add some chips to the campaign badge. I did a little bit of freehand on this along with some decals. I sliced up some regular red checkers, and I would actually freehand in the rest of them, just to make it look a little bit more fitting to the actual badge itself. I'd also add some scratches here and there to kind of mask some of the detail of my brushwork along with the decal, and overall I'm really happy with it. And with that, I'm really happy with how this guy turned out. There are definitely areas I could improve on with this scheme, and I think part of it is just planning it out a little bit better. But overall, I can't say that I'm disappointed with him. In fact, he's one of my favorite Marines I've painted for the channel, so can't really complain too much. And hopefully you guys enjoyed it too. But I've definitely been flapping my beak enough for one video. If you liked what you saw, make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share it with a friend, and remember to mishmash, kitbash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna. I promise. See ya.